Today we are doing a combos and plays walkthrough for the Blaster deck. Now, to be fair, this deck is pretty easy to pilot compared to, let's say, Tava's or Great Nature. But regardless, craploads of people were actually asking it, both in chat and on the YouTube video for my Blaster deck profile. So, if you haven't seen that yet, please check it out in the link somewhere or just check my channel.
Sponsored by Royalty Playmat Designs, the perfect way to get a custom and exclusively for you design for your Vanguard playmats. Choose your units, choose some or no zones, choose a tagline, a team name, the name of your bunny, anything your heart desires at Royalty Playmat Designs.
So, I guess what makes the most sense is going grade by grade. As we all know, Wingull Brave basically needs to boost a blaster, and then when it hits, you get to push it into soul and search for something. So, it's obviously wise to always ride blaster so you can get that skill because it's so good. What it basically allows you to do is making sure you don't misride. Because let's say you're missing a grade 2, you will often have the blaster friend Bargle and then go fetch for your grade 2. Let's say you're missing a grade 3 or a stride fodder because you might have your exceed already or something. You can use this and go ahead and get another exceed. It's so insane how it fixes rides and makes the deck way more consistent. That's an obvious play, but one thing not a lot of people perhaps think about, even though it's a pretty simple play, if you're running Wingull Youth, not everyone does, but if you do, what you can actually do in the early game, let's say this is your field, you can call down 2 Wingull Youths, and if they hit, you get to fetch twice. So really consider that. If you go like this, most people will let one hit, maybe hit a defensive trigger, and this becomes a dead card. But this is way harder to guard already, and it lets you fetch twice if you hit. So, let's say we're at the grade 2 stage. What's pretty interesting is a lot of people seem to forget that Lou also gets a boost when being boosted by Blaster Friend Bargle. So, a lot of people realize, okay, I put my Flogel behind Lou, and he gets +3, so it becomes a 16k. But more importantly, if you have a Blaster Friend Bargle and a Lou, this becomes a 19k column. And on grade 2, that's very, very deadly. Because that forces them to guard with 15k unless they have a 10k Vanguard. 15k guard is not something you really want to let go through. So let's say this is your field and you go like this, you swing, blah, blah, blah. You swing with this, they will have to let it pass. If they don't get a defensive trigger, then you can even go ahead and get your Blaster Blade and blah blah blah. So, and if you have a Flogel here, it becomes even worse for them. If you got the counter blast, you can push them to 5 damage on grade 2. That's very, very insane. So really always remember that he gets the 3k even when being boosted by him, because that's what kills people on the grade 2 turns. Let's say you're on Blaster Blade Exceed. This was something that I already discussed, but really watch out with the on-ride skill. This deck is really, really counterblast heavy. You of course have your Blaster Friend Bargle, so you can countercharge quite a lot, but regardless, don't just kill something for the sake of killing. Really consider, will this kill help me win the game, or is it just something that I'm having fun with? Don't use it when it's not really necessary. Secondly, let's say you're bricking quite hard, you only have this card in hand, and you have 2 counterblast. What you will do is you will stride into Gancelot, use your counterblast right here to go ahead and fetch a Blaster Blade. And then you can use her to go ahead and fetch your Flogel. And that gives you a field like this. So you started with a Stride Fodder and this. You strode into him. You use Blaster Blade Exceed skill to get Blaster Blade. You call her. You get Flogel. You put down Blaster Blade, and suddenly you have a field. Suddenly you can put everything here, and don't forget, yes, you have no counterblast left, but when you attack with him, you countercharge 1, ready to be used for Flogel. The great thing about this deck is it's so linear. Almost no matter what your hand is right now, you can always get off your place. Because Blaster Blade Exceed can always go ahead and fetch Blaster Blades, and this one can always go ahead and fetch anything really. Let's say you used him to get another Blaster Blade Exceed because you want to make sure you stride next turn, because maybe this is a game that will go on for long. You can still use her to go ahead and get a Blaster Blade right here. No matter how hard you brick, this deck usually has an out for it purely because of these 2. Also, you really want to be watching your soul at all times, because Lien, the second best PG in the whole game, uses soul and no hand. So let's say you are not watching your soul, and next turn you go, oh, I guard, and you don't have soul, you're dead. So always watch, do I have soul, and maybe push in a Margle into the soul so you ensure you can always use her. But that's really basic common sense. I'm just going through some things that you have to think about because people really asked for this video. Another interesting thing you have to do is abuse this doggo whenever you can. Discard a grade 1 or less card and draw. And some people are like, I don't want to lose my grade 1s, but keep in mind, this one is pretty much useless in your hand in the late game. He doesn't really get a power boost. You don't really want to call him down for that 7k. No one will actually let him go through because most people have big hands by that time. And also most Blaster Blades and Blaster Blade Exceeds will have been fetched out of your deck already. So it's just a really shit card. Don't be afraid to use him for your G-Guard. This one. And then just get rid of your Wingull Youth. Really, your Wingull Youth is so shit in the late game, which is why I might actually replace him with Laura, but anyway, is so shit in the late game that you want to be using him as fodder for anything. You use him as fodder to discard and draw. You use him as fodder for Marin when you want to guard. You G-Guard, you use him from your deck, because he's just such a dead card, and that way you thin your deck. You're ensuring you don't draw into him, because he's just that bad. But the same can be said for Laura actually in the late game. So unless you're playing against Blade Master, where your Laura is basically a godsend. But if not, Laura and him, just ditch them, get rid of them, they're super shit at that point. Another play not a lot of people make is using the double Bargle. Blaster Friend's Bargle skill set, when Blaster Blade is put in the same column as this unit and you have a Blaster Blade Vanguard counter charge. What you don't really know, because it's not obvious, but it's an actual legitimate play, you can have Blaster Friend Bargle like this. You can have two, and when you call a Blaster Blade over it, you get to counter charge twice. This is something that I found out back in the Revenger days, when you could do the same thing with Dorant and Blaster Dark Revenger. It works for Bargle in the same way, and so when you're in a pickle and you really need that counter blast to go for the kill with Alfred and Flogel, and like you have everything ready for the big plays, don't be afraid to go this and just counter charge that way, unless you know that maybe having two Bargles like that will give you a better long game, because you will be able to counter charge even more. There's one choice you kinda have to make in Blasters. Sometimes you're thinking, should I go into Gancelot or should I go into Alfred? Of course, we're assuming you already did your first stride. Your first stride is always your Gancelot. But if you have to decide on your second or third stride and you're like, I don't have a lot of counterblast. Is Alfred worth it right now? Will I get all the value out of it? That's really the only choice you have to make. And so that will really depend on your matchup and the amount of counterblast you have, but also what the rest of your hand looks like. Because let's say you have a bunch of Exceeds and Blaster Blades in hand, then you don't really have to use the on-stride. And so that's one counterblast you can save that way. If you already have a Flogel in hand, you don't have to use Starhope Trumpeter to go ahead and fetch it. If you're late into the game and they don't have a lot of damage, it might not be wise to use loose skill and attack first before going with the Vanguard. Because if they let it go through and they get a defensive trigger, you just gave them a way to guard the rest of your turn way easier, because neither of these give actual real power to Blaster Blade. They don't give plus 5 or 10k, which would be bonkers, but they don't. Really think about the fact that the defensive trigger gotten by attacking first with a rear guard and then Vanguard can really fuck you up. Lu in the late game is often not worth it because of that, unless it's really the only way to get yourself a Blaster Blade, but that's very rare. Usually this deck can get to Blaster Blade in 20,000 ways. So in general, if you got the Counter Blast and you know you might be scoring a kill, then Alfred is always the right choice. But if not, because they were playing very well and they force you basically into going Gancelot, well, yeah, go ahead, go Gancelot, but at that point you don't have the extra drive checks, and that's a real pain for your actual pressure, because even though it's very nice to have quad drive and crits and blah blah blah, it's still just one PG, and that's it, that was your turn. Gancelot is great, he really smooths out the engine, he gives you some counter charge when you really need it, but overall you want to be going in Alfred usually, unless you feel like this game is gonna take ages. I really gotta watch my resources, I don't want to waste 2 Alfreds on something that might not be the final turn. Look at, for example, the Bladewing matchup. Once they get going and they have their huge hand, going Alfred all the time might not be the best choice because, well, they will guard everything with ease, and so you might be better off actually going Gancelot a few more times, get your resources back, keep yourself safe, and then go for the kill. I know one more play for the early game, and that's the one I actually never use because I don't think it's worth it. But one thing you can do is, with Lou, you can use his skill to go ahead and fetch a Blaster Blade Spirit. And then you can nuke something with Blaster Blade Spirit skill. So if there's some unit of which you think, damn, I really need to get rid of it, that might be an interesting play, because Blaster Blade Spirit is also a very, very dead card to draw into it later into the game. Then again, you did just pay 2 full counter blasts just to nuke something, and that makes it kinda not worth it to really use that snipe. But I mean, I guess if there's ever a matchup where you really need that kind of thing, you have that option open to you. Well, those were the combos and quick plays I could come up with from the top of my head. Obviously, a lot of this deck really is pretty automated. Like, most of the plays really lead to each other. It's very easy to get your blaster blades and everything going. But if you have any more questions, go ahead and pop them down in the comments below and I will try to answer them. Make sure you subscribe, like the video. I will see you soon. Ciao.